I'm Jack Pesda, and I'm the director of the Center at Camden County College. Our motto is, we share the world with you. Our center provides the academic, non-curricular programming largely for the public in southern New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. And we're very, very happy today that we can present an event that is a local event, an event that had great significance in the history of the 1960s and 70s. And with us today is my associate and colleague, Ellen Hernandez, Associate Director of the Center, and Don Beineman, who is the president of Camden County College. And in addition to that, we also have the Camden County Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Lavelle Pugh Bassett, who is here. And of course, we have students from Haddon Heights and from high schools in Camden City. So welcome to this historic courtroom where the actual trial that we're going to speak about today was held. So you're sitting in the same seats that spectators sat in during that trial. And you're going to have some of the defendants, some of the members of the Camden 28. We handed out sheets with bios on them. And, you know, I made a mistake. I excluded one person and didn't have his bio in there. Now, it's absolutely the wrong person to exclude. It's Karl Popper, who is a famous lawyer in this area, and I suspect I may end up seeing him in court very soon. Don't look forward to that. But I'm sorry, but Karl Popper is, you may have read about him or heard about him. He's one of the leading attorneys in the area. He's done criminal cases, he's done civil cases, he's done civil rights cases, and he was one of the defense attorneys for the Camden 28. The name tags for all the people are there. You have their bios. And now I also want to thank some people that made this possible. Karl Popper was one of those people. And without Karl's help, this would not have happened. In addition, we had support from U.S. District Court Judge Robert Kugler, who will be the moderator for today's program. And Judge Kugler made it possible for us to get the use of this class, this courtroom, and I'm eternally grateful to him for that. Now, in addition, Renee Winkler, who was a reporter with the Courier Post and who is one of the most avid patrons of the Center, she introduced me to people that also contributed to making this program a reality. And Anthony Giacchino, some of you have already seen Anthony's documentary on the Camden 28. And incidentally, for all, it's referred to as the Camden 23, but it is the 28. Yeah. So he's a filmmaker. He's going to show a clip of the film. And then we're going to have Judge Kugler come out as moderator, and he will also introduce Judge Rodriguez, a senior U.S. District Judge for this area. So Judge Kugler and Judge Rodriguez. Judge Kugler.
Thank you, Jack, and welcome to the United States District Court for the District of New Jersey. We are the second oldest court in the nation. Our first judges were appointed by President George Washington. And we have a long history in this court of having trials and cases. But one of the most significant was the Camden 28. Indeed, Associate Justice William Brennan of the United States Supreme Court described the Camden 28 trial as one of the most important trials of the 20th century. Think about that. The point and purpose of this program is to demonstrate why that was and why that is. The program has a certain poignancy to me because back when I was a young man, we had the draft laws. And when a young man, it was only men, turned age 18, he had 30 days to report to the nearest draft board to register for the draft. I turned 18 in 1968. I came here to Camden to register in this building on the 4th floor, one floor up, for the draft. Indeed, it was my draft board that was the scene of this activity you're going to hear about. Had you not registered for the draft in those days, you were subject to criminal prosecution with a 5-year term of incarceration. Once the military had decided how many young men they needed for the service in the following year, the word went out to the selective service system through the draft boards as to how many young men needed to be called into the military service. And you would get an induction notice requiring you to report on a certain date. And for those of us in Camden, it was on North Broad Street in Philadelphia. Failure to report for the draft was a criminal offense for which you could be in prison for 5 years. Many men were. Some men, young men, took the option of going to Canada because the Canadian government had made it clear that it would not return draft desisters to the United States. 1968 was a pivotal year in this country. You've seen some of it in the film, you'll see some more. But it's hard, I think, for the students to understand what was going on. Behind everything was this war in Vietnam. Our involvement began in 1961 when President Kennedy first sent troops to South Vietnam. By 1962, there were 9,000 American troops. It steadily increased until in 1967, we had 545,000 young American men in combat in South Vietnam. 545,000 young men. Along with that, there began these protests. People were outraged about what was going on in Vietnam. And we'll hear a lot more about that from our panelists in just a moment. We saw references to the Maryland draft board raid. That was the Catonsville, Maryland raid. But there's been one in Milwaukee, there's been one in Baltimore, there's been one in New York. People were prosecuted, people were convicted, people were sentenced to prison in those days. 1968, January 30th, the Tet Offensive, very important in military terms in Vietnam. February 1st, there's this famous photograph of the chief of the South Vietnamese police in the streets of Saigon with his pistol executing a member of the Viet Cong. That photo was everywhere in the world. We all saw it. Americans were shocked by the inhumanity of what was happening in Vietnam. February 8th, in Orangeburg, South Carolina, which is the campus of the South Carolina State University, which is an historically black university. There were demonstrations going on there about segregation in the town. For reasons unclear, that South Carolina Highway Patrol opened fire on the students, shot them. 3 killed, 27 wounded. Most of those wounded were shot in the back as they were trying to get away. March 16th, the My Lai Massacre, where American soldiers murdered women and children, villagers in South Vietnam, for which they were prosecuted and convicted eventually. The impact on this country was profound. To think that our soldiers would do something like this. April 4th, Dr. Martin Luther King is assassinated in Memphis. Riots break out. 110 cities in this country suffered riot. More than 40 people are killed. Tens of millions of dollars worth of damage. March 19th of that year, student protesters shot down Harvard University protesting the war. April 6th, there's a shootout by the police and members of the Black Panther Party in Oakland. Several people killed. April 23rd, students protesting the Vietnam War shut down Columbia University in New York. June 5th, Robert Kennedy, younger brother of President John F. Kennedy, the United States Senator, candidate for President of the United States, is murdered in California after a campaign speech. June 23rd and 24th, a police shootout in Cleveland, with a group calling itself the Black Nationalists of New Libya. 3 suspects, 3 police officers, and a bystander were killed. Rioting erupts in Cleveland for days. On August 22nd of the year, the Democratic National Committee meets in Chicago to nominate a candidate for President of the United States because President Johnson had declared he would not run again. Tens of thousands of protesters protesting the war were in the streets of Chicago. Thousands of police meet up on them. The President's commission that was appointed to study the after effects of this riot termed it a police riot. Hundreds of people hurt. Thousands of people arrested. 1969, April, the students again shut down Harvard University. 45 are injured, 184 arrested. In that year, in July, the American troop levels first start to drop in Vietnam. 25,000 soldiers come home. In August of that year, there's peace negotiations begin in Paris. They were to fail at that point, but eventually would succeed. More police shootouts in Chicago with members of the Black Panther Party, 2 of whom were killed in their beds while they slept in their apartment. In 1970, in March, first of a series of bombings by a group that called itself, at the time, the Weather Underground. Became known as the Weathermen. And they declared war on the United States, in part as a protest to the war in Vietnam, but to protest racial injustice and other things. We followed a series of bombings planted by the Weather Underground, or the Weathermen, on college campuses. In New York City, where 3 people were killed. The Pentagon, the State Department, and the Capitol building, all bombed by this group. The seminal event of 1970 was April 29th, when the President orders United States troops to invade the country of Cambodia because North Vietnamese troops had been using Cambodia as a refuge from the fighting in South Vietnam. Widespread protests break out. College campuses all over this country are shut down by protesters. May 4th, a day which I will never forget, and none of these men and women will ever forget. Kent State University in Ohio. Protests against the war. Ohio National Guard is called in by the governor of Ohio. For reasons that are unclear to this day, the Ohio National Guardsmen opened fire with military weapons on the protesters. 4 are killed. 9 are wounded. 10 days later, Jackson State University in Mississippi. Protests. The police opened fire on the protesters. 2 were killed. 12 were wounded. In May of 1971, a Harris poll was conducted nationally. 60% of the American people are opposed to the war in Vietnam. 60%. Then we get to August of 1971. August 19th. An Hispanic motorist driving a Camden is stopped by the Camden police. He gets into a physical confrontation with the officers. He ultimately dies of his injuries. But it triggers riots here in Camden. They go on for days and nights. It's fires, burnings, destruction of property. Fortunately, no one else is killed. But I think part of the reason, maybe most of the reason, no one else is killed, is because of my good friend, Judge Joseph Rodriguez. Before he was a judge, Joe Rodriguez was a lawyer. He and his family were active in the community of Camden. Born and raised here, grew up here, went to school here. And one of those quirks of history that always fascinate me, Joe Rodriguez, then Joe Rodriguez, now Judge Rodriguez, and the then mayor of Camden, Joe Nardi, were best friends as kids growing up. So when the troubles happen, and the riots happen in Camden, Nardi turns to Rodriguez and his family to try to put an end to this before it gets out of hand and more people get killed. Joe, I hate to put you on the spot, but if you wouldn't mind, we could just spend a few minutes talking about those days and what it was like in Camden during the course of the riot, because what you're going to find out very shortly is, as soon as the riot was sort of calmed down, that's when the incident that led to the Camden 28 happened. It was all in the same week. So if you don't mind.
Well, we did have the good fortune of being friendly with the mayor at the time. He was the godfather of my youngest daughter, and I was the godfather of his youngest daughter. So we did have that relationship. But in spite of that, we each had our responsibilities to our community. Our community had to know that we were credibly fighting for their rights in the midst of this terrible happening, with the tear gas and dogs, and it's a real calamity, buildings burning. Joe had to do his job as mayor, I had to do my job as the leader of, well, I was called the leader of the community in the negotiations that were taking place. And we were able, through conversation, to at least come to the understanding. Now, we had a unique mission during that riot. Why it was different from Newark, why it was different from Patterson or Jersey City, is we had an objective that suburban police were brought into the city and they were tear gassing at will at people who were on their porches, and here it's August, it's hot, and they're out on their porches, and the thing was chaos. We had to have them removed, and we needed to make sure that the officers that were involved were suspended to show that at least the system was working with respect to coming to the realization of what had taken place. Now, this person who was injured, and we could spend the rest of the day talking about the uniqueness of our involvement in that issue. The uniqueness was that once we were able to come to some resolution to bring the conflict to a peaceful end for the moment, there was something else happening. Something else was happening in the city. And I was asked by a personal friend that if we needed a lawyer, who would you recommend? Because you were active in the bar, who would you recommend? And I gave the phone number of a good trial lawyer in the city of Camden, not knowing why he was going to get involved, but here's a number you could call if you have a problem. And it was Carl Poplar, who then became the bridge to the Camden 28. I knew most of the people in the Camden 28. I've been good friends with, back then, Father and now Monsignor Doyle. And we had a lot of interesting situations together. But here I was involved in Camden with the disturbance, and here was Monsignor Doyle involved in doing something else. In fact, after it all finished, I said to him, isn't it easier to come up to this courtroom by elevator than it was in the ladder? But let me end by saying this. The important thing in having people that have confidence in those that are handling the situation for them, showing the credibility of what it is you're doing, it's important because you're able to move people report to them later, but uniquely, the person that was injured, the victim of the attack by the police, was at Cooper Hospital. And he was dying. His family was represented by Carl Poplar. And he was on life supports. And it was important to have confidence with the family, to be able to determine when it was the appropriate time, when the time came, to remove the life supports. It uniquely came a couple of days after we were able to bring the violence that was occurring to some conclusion. And again, who was the person involved there with the parents? It was Carl Poplar. So my only purpose here is to say, yes, we were in turmoil in the city. Carl was with me the whole time. Someone needed a phone number. I said, well, call Carl. He's a trial lawyer. And then from that point on, you'll hear of Carl's involvement.
Things start to cool down in Camden. But then, early morning hours of August 22nd, here in this building, one floor up, the incident occurs. And you'll hear more about that. But 8 people, I'll say it, break into the draft board, start destroying the draft records. I never did find out if mine were among those destroyed. But as they left, you see there was an informant in the group who was keeping the FBI informed as to what was going on. And that's a whole story in and of itself, and maybe we'll have time to get into that. So the FBI was waiting. 40 agents were waiting out there and arrested 8 people who were in the building, and they arrested another 12 that night, and over the course of the following days, some more were arrested and charged. For bail hearings, Father Doyle took a very principled stand. He would not consent to being released on bail so long as any other defendant remained in jail. Trial was to begin 18 months later in February of 1973. One of the ironies, I think, of the history here was in those intervening 18 months, the war in Vietnam was actually winding down from an American perspective. By October of '71, we were down to less than 200,000 troops in Vietnam. By November of '72, we had 27,500 troops left in Vietnam. On January 27, 1973, a month before the trial began, we signed the Paris Peace Accords with the Vietnamese to formally end the war and bring home the prisoners of war. And then March 29, 1973, just as the trial was winding up, the last American combat soldier left Vietnam. So let's talk about this trial. I'm going to call upon our panelists to give you their perspective of those days, but I'll give you some of the background of what was going on in our country. I mean, those of you who think that times are troubling now, you have no idea what it was like to live through those days in this country. And because I'm a lawyer, I want to start with the lawyers. Because it's always fascinated me from a historical perspective. So all of these other draft cases, Catonsville 9, Baltimore 4, New York, and Milwaukee, the protesters, the people who went into the draft boards and destroyed records, were all convicted. And some of them got pretty hefty prison sentences. The Berrigan brothers, you saw the reference in the film to the Berrigan brothers. They were sentenced to prison, 3.5 years. But here, our defendants were acquitted. David Carey's is one, and was one, of the preeminent civil rights lawyers in this area of the country. He's done this his whole life. If you know him, you'll be surprised by the fact that he got involved in this case early on, but always in the background, part of the strategy in this case. So I'll start with Mr. Carey's. Why do you think this case was so different? Why do you think that the defendants in this case were acquitted and all the others around the country were convicted and went to prison?
Well, it's certainly a complicated question, and one can rely on different sources of belief or understanding. So talking to the jurors was one good one, asking them why they did what they did. And looking at the defenses and how they differ from the other cases where many people went to jail for a serious time, and these defendants were ready. There's a common element that I think was important, but not just in this case, which was the defendants spoke for themselves. This humanizes them, makes them actors rather than passive objects. They were also quite effective. And then myself and two other lawyers also spoke. So we had an arrangement we tended to call co-counsel. It's very unusual. You have a right to represent yourself. You have a right to a lawyer. Usually you don't have a right to both. I think that turned out to be rather significant, although self-representation was typical. Well, there were two defenses, and maybe I'll note as I go through the differences to the other cases. But the common defense was what's usually called jury nullification. It's a strange term because it implies something that's not part of the system, but it actually is part of the system. And in our system, jurors, if they acquit, don't have to give a reason, and their verdict is not reviewable. The prosecution can't say to an appellate court, the jury got it wrong and they acquitted this person. You're acquitted, that's it, double jeopardy, you can't be tried again. That's the end of the matter. Now, one of the things that's perhaps strange, since this is very much part of the system, is the law is generally, and judges will generally enforce it this way, that you're not supposed to talk about this. You're not supposed to allude to it or argue as you would for other defenses. You'd say to the jury, here's why this defense is significant in this particular case and why we think you should apply it. So the nullification argument was the war was so horrible, lacked a rational or civil basis, was just flat out wrong, and that nonviolent action to stop it and to call public attention to its worst aspect was justified. It's a kind of justifiable lapse of the law is what you're suggesting, that the jury should say, we're the conscience of the community, and we essentially don't believe what these people did should be regarded as criminal in this particular instance. Not that it's okay to destroy government property or to burglarize the building we sit in today. But in this particular application, it's something a jury should do, we argue. Now, this was argued in pretty much all of the cases. It's a very hard argument to make. It's not like free speech. You're saying all we did was hand out a leaflet. They did break into the building in the middle of the night. They tore up most all of the draft records, of which there were no copies. Interesting, too, because the 40 FBI agents that Judge Kugler referred to sat there and watched while all this went on. In the closing, one of my favorite themes was that neither side cared about these poor pieces of paper. Right? The defendants thought they were part of the machinery of war that shouldn't exist. The government thought they also were part of the machinery of war, but it was expendable because they wanted to catch these people in the act. And that part of the backdrop, I don't know if we'll have time to get to it, what the motivation was of J. Edgar Hoover and John Mitchell, the Attorney General. But now, in this case, in addition to the nullification, which we press, there was a second defense based on the fact that the informer, who the judge referred to, Bob Hardy, was paid by the FBI on an hourly rate, and all his expenses were covered. And he actually thought up pretty much the basic strategy and plan for breaking into the draft board. What was different physically about the task here was the other draft boards, usually people would go in and hide in the bathroom until closing time. Then after the workers in the draft board left, they'd come out of the bathroom and tear up the records. This was a 5th floor of a major big building with a watchman, with a guard. You needed some basic burglary skills to pull this off. And those appeared to be lacking. The government then sent in this informant who fell into their laps. He just told them. He was a close personal friend, and we can imagine how difficult this would be of many of the defendants, particularly Father Doyle and Michael Giacondo. And so the government provided strategies, pretty much all of the burglary tools that were needed. And each and every piece was paid for by the FBI. In addition, Hardy would bring a bag of groceries once a week to fund the plotters so they could eat. I mean, they weren't starving, but it certainly made things easier. And even the groceries were paid for by the FBI. So we then had, and we can go into this in more detail, we had to confront basically the law of entrapment, which is the closest recognized defense. There are difficulties in raising it. Primarily, the law said, and still says, even if you were entrapped, you can't raise the defense if you were predisposed to do the crime. Predisposed to do the crime. It's an odd reasoning of the law that I've never heard a good explanation for. All of them, everyone who does the crime and claims entrapment was predisposed in the sense that whatever inducement the government offered was sufficient to get them to do it. And what we know more than that is I think kind of elusive. What usually happens is if you have a record of doing it in the past, then they say, okay, you're predisposed. That's the easy case.
What if you've never been caught doing it in the past?
You're just predisposed in your thoughts. That's dangerous, I guess. So this defense, we can go into this if we want but there was a pending case before the Supreme Court, and I did an amicus to try to affect the law that would be applied in our case. It's called Russell v. United States. It came down, and actually in Russell, our amicus brief, on behalf of the ACLU and some other groups, directed at the law, but attaching an affidavit from Harding as to what he did, because he eventually flipped as a result of some meetings with Father Doyle and me in various secret locations in the Camden area. So we basically argued that this predisposition was wrong and should be overruled. If not, there at least should be an exception for cases, for instance, where the government is acting against its political opponents and kind of setting them up to make them look bad. At least that's all we thought then was the purpose. And this Russell case came down a few weeks before our case went to the jury, and Judge Clarkson Fisher made an unusual ruling. There was an exception language, as we asked in the Russell case. We called that the Camden 28 exception, and asked the judge to apply it in this case. And he did. And so the two defenses raised the problem within the defendants group because some saw the entrapment as belittling the action and inconsistent with the politics and meaning of the action. Others saw it, as I did, as really another political defense, and the two would go hopefully together. This is the kind of stuff that governments and FBIs do. In this period, of course, we're used to the FBI being condemned by Donald Trump from the right. In those days, the FBI was under considerable criticism, but it came more from the progressives. So let me stop there. I mean, I think it's the two defenses, but we can talk about different parts.
Just a postscript about the informant. He testified that he had gone to the FBI because he was concerned that there was going to be a crime committed. He didn't want to see his friends suffer for it. And he said the FBI promised him that they would put an end to this conspiracy before the break-in, and therefore no one would ever go to jail and be convicted of a serious crime, which turned out not to be true. Anyway, Carl Hoffman, you've already been introduced by Judge Rodriguez as this well-known, very capable criminal defense lawyer who got involved in this from the get-go. What's your perspective on why this trial turned out differently than all the others that had been in the country before this?
Well, this is 47 years ago, and you see this old guy to my right, David Carey's. Think about what he looked like 47 years ago. He was a kid, and now he's Professor David Carey's, a very prominent professor at Temple, and he had a partner who also was a kid, David Radowski, who's now a prominent professor at Penn Law School. And why is this different than other cases? Well, the lawyers that were involved in other cases were a little bit more assertive, if not a little bit more flamboyant. And I, as a young lawyer, stood in awe of these two lawyers, non-professors, Carey and Radowski, who were able not to become the focus of the trial, as other lawyers were in the other cases. They stood, in many respects, in the background and somehow put the defendants out front before the jury. And they did it in such a magnificent way. And notwithstanding that these defendants acted as their own lawyers. They absolutely had the best legal minds, raising these legal issues that David Carey was just telling me about. Also, why it was different than in other cases, besides this great skill, both legal and practical, of Carey's and Kowalski, they had a judge named Clarkston Fisher, who was well respected. They even named the courthouse after him in the federal court in Trenton during the time. And most judges at that time in criminal trials were very rigid. And that's sort of a euphemism for being very tough. Judge Fisher was very deferential, not bending the law at all, but being very deferential to the defendants. He may very well be in the back of his mind, he was not antagonistic with the defendants. So he was cordial, and he was deferential, and he was not as rigid as other judges in criminal cases. And then there was, why was this different than other trials? Well, I think it was the defendants themselves. They were out front, they communicated directly with the jury, rather than just sitting there in the courtroom, making noise and jumping up and being dramatic against the war. They appeared, again, very dignified and very sincere and nonviolent. They did not subliminally or subconsciously communicate the violence that other defendants communicated. So all of the present time, during the trial, the jury saw these particular individuals possibly in a different light than they saw the defendants in other trials. And they conducted, a superb trial. I have to say, I think the jury respected the defendants. It's not commonplace that juries respect defendants accused of crime. And I think that that's happened. And I think ultimately, the jury admired the defendants. And I don't think that happened in other trials. And that's sort of been, I pretty much like I've had the pleasure just to watch these people. Carey, Swadowski, and the defendants. And they sort of, I was sort of in awe of them all.
It may have been unprecedented at that time for a trial in the federal court of the United States. The role, the out front leading role that the defendants themselves took in their own defense. It's still, I have to tell you, very unusual that you have such an active defense by the people who are actually charged with the crime. Well, let's turn now to the people who actually were involved in this. We'll start with Keith Forsyth. You have everybody's bio here, so you know a little bit about them. I guess the first question that everybody wants to know is, I gave some background as to what's going on in this nation at the time. So Keith, what was going through your mind? Why did you want to get involved in this protest, this kind of a protest?
So I got involved in the peace movement in the fall of 1968, and by early 1969, it was my primary occupation, and stayed that way until the war ended. And so I was involved in a lot of different types of anti-war activity, a lot of legal organizations like the Demobilization Committee and the National Peace Action Coalition. But when I came to Philadelphia in 1970, I came here with the intention of joining the nonviolent civil disobedience actions, because there really weren't any actions like that I knew of anyway taking place in Ohio where I lived. So I got involved in this network and started participating in the draft board movement while maintaining my work with the National Peace Action Coalition. And so it was just a natural you know, it was another tactic, another way to oppose the war that felt more effective and more effective than simply organizing legal protests, although I certainly felt that was important in doing that. That whole year was a busy one. It was the FBI action in March, and then the organization of the May Day protests for May 1, and then back to the National Peace Action Coalition, and then Camden after that.
Well, certainly you must have been aware of the other draft board raids, we'll call them draft board raids, and the outcome of those, and the prison sentences that were being imposed. What thought did you give to that? What would happen to you if you were caught?
I'm a pretty practical guy, so I got a copy of David, I forget his name, Joan Bias's husband at the time.
Harris.
David Harris wrote a very handy book on how to go to federal prison for civil disobedience. So, you know, it's the whole Boy Scout thing, you know, be prepared, so that's what I did. Because, you know, if you're gonna break into draft boards in the middle of the night, sooner or later, you're gonna get caught.
We'll come back to you in a minute with some other questions, but Mr. Dixon, Dean Dixon, why did you get involved? What were you thinking at the time?
Well, pretty much the same kind of reasons pretty much the same kind of reasons that Keith was speaking of, and what you went through when you gave your talk. I came from a different level in terms of I was just an ordinary working stiff going through life as most people do, getting up in the morning, going to work, coming home, but of course the politics of the war were always in front, and the idea of the massive violence being perpetrated on people was one that struck home with me, that for the most part, I was always against hurting somebody else. Not that I'm any kind of hero, but I didn't want to get hurt either, so if we do a little quick road there. But anyway, my involvement in this came from being, first of all, active in my church. I was a member of the parish council, and all these things kind of came up in discussions in church, and of course there was the example of the Berrigans. And when you look at all the different things that were happening that Bush spoke about, every one of them weighs heavily on you when you're thinking about that, and when you're looking at it. You're watching your kids grow up and thinking that they have nothing more to face than exactly the same kind of violence that keeps going on and on. And I'm a very big admirer of Dr. Martin Luther King and the way he handled his problems and the problems of his people, the way he brought them in the forefront and what he had to go through to get it there. And following that kind of example, you know you have to do things to try and stop the kind of violence and misleading things that the government does to get you involved in these things. You have to try and stop that. And each incident just brings it more home and then gets you more involved. So I was involved in doing all the peace marches and writing to congressmen and demonstrating when it was possible to do that. And none of them were working. You would either be patted on the head and say, okay, we understand, and we'll take care of it, but they never would. And then with the advent of things coming out, being made public, like the Pentagon Papers and the various other things that involved Tom King incident, which proved to be a falsehood. And more examples of the government lying to the people in order to accomplish their ends. And their ends, of course, were to maintain power and their influence in the world. finally reach a point where you say, we gotta stop it, and then how do you stop it? Then we have the example of people like the Americans and the resistance community that was doing things like raising grass poison and conducting nonviolent protests and being put in prison for it. That's the only way you get heard. So that's what I decided to do, along with a bunch of other people. We decided to take that step and then proceeded on to taking the step.
Well, when you were meeting, you're all meeting together and trying to figure out what to do, certainly the same question I asked Keith. Is that you knew other people were going to prison for similar crimes. What conversations did you have? What thoughts did everybody have as to, what's going to happen to us when we get caught, because you have to expect you're going to get caught? What thought went into that?
Well, I think part of being willing to involve yourself in something like that, you were brought to that point by the knowledge of what the government's doing and your desire to stop it and what it would take. And in that involvement, it's obvious that you're going to have to do something, especially when you take a step like getting involved in an action or in some sort of a resistance thing. That you're going to have to break the law in order to be heard, because they won't listen to you when you're just talking. You're being reasonable, and you're sending letters to your congressman, and they all say, okay, we'll listen, and they put it in the file, and nothing ever happens. So you know that you're going to have to do something more drastic in order to be heard. And doing that taking that drastic action is going to put you in jeopardy. It's just something you accept. And I don't know if there was that much discussion of, well, let's do this. And, oh yeah, don't forget that if we do this, we're likely to go to jail. I think every one of us that was involved in any kind of resistance actions during that time was well aware of the fact that you're going to get caught and you're going to have to go to jail. And probably the culmination of it, getting caught and being put on trial, was the moment that they were allowing us to express ourselves to the people. And it was only through situations that we ended up with a judge like Fox and Fisher, who sat back and said, okay, tell us your story. And all of the defendants told their story, and all of the jury heard it and listened to it. And there was our voice being heard finally, with a not guilty verdict.
Joe Morelli, you weren't even from this area. So how did you get involved in Camden, and why did you get involved in Camden?
So I was 20 at the time. So who's 20? 19, 18, 19, 20, right? So I was pretty young. Yeah, I know there's more than one of you. And my goal here is to wake you up a little bit, to stretch. So if you're in that younger cohort, and you gave Judge an amazingly concise, compelling history of the time, all of which is in my mind, some of which I forget. I'm like sitting up here thinking, oh my God, how did I ever navigate all that? Well, for me, I was raised in a family very committed to faith, family, and community. No, and very much raised in a tradition that we have to look out for each other. And I think my parents never imagined that foundation would be a springboard for decisions I made. And my parents have both died. I've recently gone through some of their personal belongings, and my mother and father saved all the letters I was writing to them in the late 60s and early 70s. And I was reviewing them before I came here today to see the fire that was burning in me, this sense of this madness, not just across oceans and on other continents, but here in our own country. Like they're part and parcel of the same kind of thinking. And so this sense that this couldn't go on in my name as an American, and it couldn't go on my watch. Now, I give thanks every day for my faith for many reasons, but it also gave me guardrails to very clearly stay in the nonviolent lane. I know a lot of good people who strayed out of that lane, and it was life-changing for them. I mean, they were just so frustrated. And I understood that frustration, but I very much believed in the importance of collective action and working in nonviolent ways, right? But I had like Anthony, an art history professor in the school that I went to, who saw my passion and fire and belief that we had to stop this madness. And she introduced me at a very young age to Dan and Philip Berrigan. And so he started in 1968, I started in 1969. The deaths of the students at Kent State and Jackson State, nonviolent protests. So people's rights were being violated. Over 2 million people died in Vietnam, Vietnamese people. Over 2 million people died in the course of that war. 58,000 Americans died, and so many more thousand Americans. I don't know, you may have fathers, uncles, brothers, neighbors who came back from that war, who to this day, their lives have been changed by that experience. So for me, it was a call to work for peace and justice, but I'll tell you, I was scared to death. So I like this, be prepared, and they were right. It's a strange thing to say, but those of us very actively involved in this would go to workshops to prepare, kind of like career counseling. People who had gone away to prison for nonviolent civil disobedience would talk to you, but you have tracks when you get to, I thought I'd be going to Alderson, West Virginia. You have tracks. You can try to reform prison conditions, and this is what that looks like. Now, the downside of that is you're probably not going to be eligible for parole anytime soon. You can study the law and become a paralegal and help people with their appeals. You can work and do GED classes, and how would we be useful? We could have gone 47 years. We believed we would go for 5. So I would say 20. I didn't just say, well, I'm ready, right? I have a great story to tell, and we romanticized the work, but it was hard. And there were many dark nights of the soul, and my family went through tremendous pain because 2 of their 4 children were involved in this action, my sister as well. So it was difficult times, but at the end of the day, the truth was, citizens change the world. Ever since the Ken Burns documentary on Vietnam came out, I, in a public forum, wanted to say, I don't know how many of you saw that. I encourage you now, if you haven't seen it, check it out, because you will really learn a lot about, from the soldier's perspective, from the policy perspective, the fake news and the real truth of what was going on there. But the peace movement got short shrift in that. And I have written to Ken Burns about this. It was sort of marginalized as these kind of counterculture hippies or these violent, radical people, when in fact it was ordinary people who said, not in our name, not on our watch. We took all great risk and worked in collective action, and I very much believe that's what helped to end this war. I believe that larger movement then helped to end the war, and that larger movement today is needed more than ever. So, I don't know if
58,000 Americans were killed in that war. And those of you, particularly the young people who have not visited the memorial in Washington, D.C., I urge you to do so. It is a haunting place. And I think, from my perspective, I know some of those names on that wall. It's a wake-up call. It's a reminder of how things can go wrong if we don't get involved. Anyway, saving the best for last. Michael Doyle, Monsignor Michael Doyle. There's a short biography on him, but it doesn't do the man justice. If you've been awake in this area for the last 40 years, you know Michael Doyle. If there was a Nobel Prize for activism and righting injustices, Father Doyle would have a shelf full of them. I don't know where Camden would be these days without his presence, without his urging us on to do the right thing. You, Monsignor, were a key figure in this trial. You were sort of the face of the movement, face of the defendants. Why? Why did you get involved in this?
Made no sense. Well, I always thought, since I was a little boy, that wars were horrendous things. They made no sense to me, and I had that kind of non-violent attitude from I was a little boy. And then I came here, and I came here in 1959, and came here to convert the natives, and failed. So, anyway, I heard the statement that the first casualty in war is the truth. Wars are supported by lies, and they come from presidents and people in power. But no senator's son died in Vietnam. No congressman's son died in Vietnam because they never got sent to the front. But the poor kids of Camden, they were up front. And college was a deferment for the young people of America. And the young people of Camden didn't go to college. So the people who died in Vietnam were not the sons of the wealthy or the powerful. They were the sons of fathers and mothers in the poor cities of the United States. And I knew that. I knew it. There were 30 young, beautiful boys killed from Camden, killed in Vietnam. 30. And from here to Cape May, there were 300 young, beautiful boys killed in Vietnam. Did they know what it meant? No, they didn't. They were, like, it's horrendous when you think of it. And I'm saying no government sons ever went to Vietnam. They had the way to avoid it. But the poor kids in Camden or in any town in this country didn't have that kind of option. So if you look at the 57,000, or 58, I think, Joni said 58,000 who died in Vietnam, they were the sons of poorer, powerless American people. So like when you look at that and you say, it's all wrong. It's all wrong. If it's so great an idea, then the senator sends his son to do this great thing. That war was a mistake, and they supported it. The government supported it. So you begin to see, when you see that no government people's sons ever went to Vietnam. And it was a slaughter, because the weapons we have now are horrendous. The Industrial Revolution changed war. It created the weaponry that was outrageous slaughter. It's like amazing. And what happens when President Truman dropped 2 atomic bombs on cities and incinerated 100,000 people in seconds. It's all wrong when you get to that point. It's all wrong. It's the poor children and poor people that this bomb explodes and wipes them out. For what? It's outrageous. And then you say, there's no point in writing a letter to those people. You would have to act. Even if your act is small, well, it's an act. And I wanted to give some suffering to the words I spoke. And I thought if I did, people would say, well, he believes it. Don't believe it if I'm just talking. If I could go there, and I was a happy fellow that we got arrested. If we didn't get arrested, it would say nothing. Get arrested and have I think it was 18% of the priests of the Diocese of Camden supported me. That leaves 72% who didn't support me. The bishop, in his own way, he's a lawyer, a civil lawyer, and he said about me, he's innocent until he's proved guilty. I was fair enough, and I was innocent till proved guilty, and I wasn't proved guilty. We were acquitted, and we had jurors. There were 4 Catholics on the jury, and the rest of the 16 belonged to some other religious denomination or whatever. But anyway, there was one woman on the jury, and her name was Anna Bertino. She was from Hamilton. And then when she was interviewed by the prosecutor, and I thought that he would get rid of her because looked like she said America was wrong when it entered into Vietnam before the war. It was wrong for getting involved in any way, she said. And then she said, and I remember her word, in this room, she said, and they compounded it by entering it with the military. That's what she said, and yet she was let go through. I knew that woman would never convict me. I just knew it, right there. So we had a hung jury from day one. And when she told me about the time we had to get together to come up with a verdict, she said, I said to them, they're innocent, and you can sit here till you turn blue, and I will not change my opinion. So eventually, and I should tell you the day that that we were acquitted. I was doing Mass down in Westville. Not many churches would give me a job to say Mass, but just one. And the rest of them were against me. And so somebody came by and told me that we were only the verdict was in. And so then I decided to have a good breakfast. Bacon, eggs, the works, and to delay the verdict being done. And they couldn't give it without me. So my purpose was that the people, who were not a majority, but many people who supported us would come to Camden and would be there regardless. And so enough, and that was true. And then when I arrived so late, they said, "What happened to you?" I didn't say why I came so late. But anyway, when I went into the courtroom, the stenographer, she's the miracle woman who can get everything down on that. It's amazing to watch. And she's the stenographer, and I liked her, and she came to me and she said, they all went to Mass in Our Lady of Good Counsel in Moorestown. There was only 4 Catholics in the jury. The whole jury went to Mass in Moorestown. And I said to myself, we're acquitted. Why? Anna Bertino was a very valiant Catholic woman who went to Mass every Sunday. And she was there, and if they're agreeing with Anna, guess what? We're acquitted. And so we were. And I loved being on trial. I loved it. We were 3 months on trial. We talked a lot. And the Judge Fisher, was very fair to us. And he had a great sense of humor. And he was so nice to me. He couldn't have been nicer to me. And I was a felon. The judge was so nice to me. And I don't know why he was, but he was. And I enjoyed the way he was, and it was a great experience, and to be able to cross-examine FBI agents. Imagine that. I'm a little peasant from Ireland doing that, and I loved doing it. I did. It was just great experience, and great gratitude to a country that has a way of dealing with the felon, and that it has a democracy, and that it has a way, and the rights of the felon, the rights we had. It was like I just treasured that, and I experienced it for myself, that we had rights, even though in the public eye we were criminals. But it was our action against the war, and our salute to those who died in it, from this country and from Vietnam. All of them who died. So we have to stop wars, and we have to learn how to solve problems without guns. We have to learn that killing a human being is a horrendous act. It's horrendous. to kill another brother or to kill another sister. It should never happen. Thank you for agreeing with that.
Well, thank you, Father. We'll be back to you in a minute.
We should learn from Gandhi, who was maybe one of the greatest persons who ever lived, Gandhi. And he believed in non-violence, and he won as a non-violent leader. So he showed us something great, and we should look for our guidance from someone as great as Mahatma Gandhi. I'm talking too much as usual.
No, these are very interesting things to say, particularly about how fair Judge Fisher was. You see, contrary to what Mr. Poplar will tell you, sometimes judges are fair.
Not since 1973.
Your good friend Judge Rodriguez has been a judge since 1973. Anyway, let's go back to Keith Forsyth. You had this trial, you're acquitted, statement that's made by the defendants in the case, in their actions in going to trial. What impact do you think the trial and the result had? Let's start with on you, and then broaden it to the country, the community. What impact did this have on you?
You know, I don't really know what impact it had on me, other than it probably cemented my ties with the community of people that you see sitting here and many who aren't sitting here. If anything, it strengthened my commitment. It was just another battle in a long war. And as far as what impact it had on the community, I think the draft board rate movement generally had much more impact than is normally acknowledged, which is not news in line with Joan's comments about, the people who write history tend to favor the people who are powerful in their accounts. And there were over 300 draft board rates in this country, all over the United States. A lot of them associated with the so-called Catholic left, a lot of them not. And it put a serious dent in the ability to raise troops for Vietnam. There were many other forms of resistance, refusing induction, et cetera, et cetera. And the trial specifically, though, the people who testified at the trial, the defendants, gave very eloquent testimony, and a lot of that testimony got in newspapers, it got in front of the general public in a way that other information against the war did not. The press was not, in general, that favorable to the peace movement. There was the occasional story, like the Pentagon Papers came out, and you got a little dollop of truth there. But in general, the papers did not tell the whole truth about Vietnam. And so the trial gave a chance for us to speak past the government lies and tell some truth that people were able to hear. So I think that had a big impact. Oh, one other thing, I think the fact that we won a somewhat of a victory. We were definitely guilty, there's no question about it. But yet we were found not guilty, which is something that often happened back in the days of slavery when people would go on trial for violating the Fugitive Slave Act, and the juries would refuse to convict them even though they were guilty, as we were guilty. And I think that was an encouragement to people in the peace movement. When you're that young and you've been fighting something for 3, 4, 5 years, that seems like forever, you can get frustrated quite easily. And I think that a victory was always wrong.
Historically, the American involvement in the war started to wind down, I think, if you look at the dates. Before this draft raid, but certainly after Catonsville Mine and some of those others. And by late 1969, there were massive anti-war protests in the cities of the United States, including in Washington, D.C., where the estimates ran from 500,000 people to 1 million people marched in Washington, including my colleague, Judge Jerome Smith. Please get to that. So that's the kind of mood that we have in the country. Then we have this trial. And Jim Dixon, what do you think the impact of this case, this trial, was on our communities?
Well, locally on the communities that I was associated with, the impact was good. Mostly because this particular trial had kind of a diverse group of people who were involved, ranging from the college students, the younger kids, all the way up to people like Mike Condo, myself, John Reed Brady, who were all, well, at that time we would call us elderly. We were all like, 40s, 30s, late 30s, family people, working people. And that was pretty much the first time that kind of a group was involved in something like this. And then what we had to present to the jury was, yes, we did this, that we performed this action, and we actually did it. And for the jury to come back and say not guilty was the biggest part of the victory, because the jury was composed of ordinary citizens from this area. There weren't any hippies on the jury, there weren't any weathermen on the jury, they were just ordinary working people. And they heard what we had to say, and they accepted it and said, we're joining you. So it was like the Camden 28 suddenly became the Camden 42. With the jury just joining us. So that, among the people of the community, that made a great impact, because here were people who were their voice, not the voice of the protesters, but the people's voice coming in saying, everything you're saying is right. What you did was right. We have to stop this war. And that was like the beginning of the spread throughout the country. That echoed everywhere. The idea that ordinary people were now standing up and saying, stop it, stop these actions, not wrong.
John Riley, looking back on this, do you think that raid on this draft board upstairs from here in August of 1971 and the subsequent trial 18 months later impacted this country's involvement in that war?
But absolutely. I think, as you pointed out, by the time we came to trial, which was also part of the strategy, I often wonder, had we come to trial in 71 versus 73, the objective conditions were shifting. But I think it's important to think about, it was a big ecosystem. There were 17 of the 28 ultimately went on trial. So it's about us, but really, there was the way you're in the courtroom today, we had a courtroom filled with people every day of that trial, right? We had a jury box filled with people. Everybody in that village and ecosystem, regardless of what your perspective was when you came in, was really changed in the process. So I think for me, and for the country, as Jean and Keith are pointing out, ordinary people stood up and said enough. Not in my name, not on my watch. We're going to come back with not guilty. And I want to be clear, I think all the defendants wanted to reject the entrapment defense, because we were going to do it one way or the other. We were going to get in to that fifth floor. one way or the other. We had a few citizen burglars with experience for a good cause with us. We would have done it anyway, right? But I think, did we inspire the jury? The jury absolutely inspired us, inspired me. My life has been changed by this experience. It deepened in me a belief that we can make a difference when you work, as Father Michael saying, nonviolently and in collective action. I mean, a couple of years of my life was sort of turned upside down with this, but it only strengthened in me the belief that, that Margaret Mead quote, never doubt the power of citizens to make a difference. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. That not just for me, but I think for everybody who was involved in it in the larger community, it strengthened our resolve. And I do think that the protests, the educational work, all the responsible risk-taking that went on did help inform the American public. Again, not unlike today, what needs to be done, so that people know what's really going on and understand that we each and all collectively have a responsibility to change things that we don't think make sense. And in fact we can, and history is filled with those examples of people ordinary people who found the courage to do something. So, and then the rest of my work life was devoted, is devoted to organizing and facilitating groups of people to come together and figure out how to make some kind of positive change. Because I don't know if we're going to get back to me in this time period. I want to take 1 minute to just say, we, in the course of the years, have lost many people who were on trial here with us, who left their lights went out way before their time, though their lights live in our hearts. And if you could indulge me, I just wanted to read out their names in this courtroom. Because actually for us, it's kind of emotional to be back in this courtroom again. We were here for 63, 66 days back in 1973, right? So I'm just going to read their names for a minute. Is that okay, Judge? So Jema Abdu, Dr. Bill Anderson, Milo Billman, Mike Giocondo, John Grady, Mel Madden, Father Ned Murphy, Anita Ricci, John Swinglish, Sarah Tosi, great warriors for peace, great peacemakers who live in our hearts today, and I just wanted to be sure we all remember them.
Thank you. Let me go back to David Carey's. You've been, entire professional life, you've been involved in causes such as this, and so maybe you have a different perspective on this than others. I don't know, we'll find out. But do you think that this draft board raid and the charges and the subsequent trial had any kind of impact on the course of the war?
Well, it's always hard to gauge the effect of some particular ingredient in a historical process that was going on. And it's somewhat subjective, but I think this had an enormous effect. And first of all, it's in the category of not just protest, but putting yourself on the line. And it's always fascinated me through the whole thing. I was as convinced against the war as any of the defendants, but had they asked, and they didn't, for me to come along, I would have said no. You know, I'm more useful as an attorney, etc. So I think that reflects that we do hold it as more significant when someone takes a risk, and then to get acquitted is just all the more significant. It's hard to say. I don't know that it was a rallying cry in future demonstrations, or how much it was known. I think, on how the whole thing happened, it's, I think, a little easy to sit here now, and it makes total sense. How could the jury rule otherwise? But to realize that all these factors, including really articulate expressions by defendants on their motivation, weren't enough in any of the other cases. And in truth, the barrier is difficult. You have a requirement of unanimity. You've got to convince all 12 of the jurors. I mean, it's not like a hung jury. It can be any split. Or there could have been, as in many cases, say, convictions of a few people viewed as the ringleaders or the out-of-towners versus the locals. You could have had all these combinations. And even in the things that Anna Martino, who, along with Sam Braithwaite, I remember, another of the jurors, the two of them, it was very clear, just as a matter of principle, based on how wrong the war is, they would have acquitted. They said that there were holdouts. Everybody knew that. It took 4 days. And that the FBI role is what was used to convince the holdouts to go along with it. In a case that's highly publicized like this, you've got the added factor of jurors worried about what their widely perceived vote is going to be perceived at in their own communities or their workplaces. The more you can provide them, in my experience, with an explanation that's easily understood, like government doing entrapment-like conduct, although it technically wasn't entrapment, the better chance you had. And that's the quotes from Anna Martino and others and discussions I had with them. That's how the last holdouts, the remaining jurors, could justify it and live with it.
Your right to a jury trial is found in criminal cases in the 6th Amendment to the Constitution. And your right to a jury trial in civil cases is found in the 7th Amendment to the Constitution. Never give up that right. Very few countries in this world resolve their cases by juries. This is the example of why we need to maintain the right to a jury trial. The last word I'm going to give to the Monsignor. Father Doyle, you ready? You've had all these decades since that trial. You look back on that trial from all those years ago. Would you have done anything different looking at it today?
I would do nothing different. And it was a great experience being in an American courtroom. And we had a wonderful lawyer, he's here somewhere, David Carey's, who is brilliant. And he was so good. And so the judge was wonderful. He was. And the prosecutor, and he died some years ago with cancer in New York, John Barry. And I never had any contact with him except in his position as the prosecutor. So it was never anything sort of friendly. And then when he died, I didn't know whether to go to his funeral or not. But I said if I go and it didn't matter, I just lose my time. If I don't go and it mattered, I can never solve it. So I went. And after the funeral, his wife came to me at the back of the church. And she sought me out where I was standing out of the way. And she put her hand out and she said, "He really loved you." In 1,000 years, I would never have thought that. But that's what she told me. And she tells the truth, even though she's a sister of the president.
John Barry
But she
was married.
tells the truth. And she was very happy that I said that I came to his funeral. She was very happy that I did. And I was very happy that, because I didn't think he would care one hoot about me. That's what she told me, and I believe her. But maybe he has no sense. But he did, and that's what she said. He loved me. And I would always remember him with gratitude and respect and prayer.
John Barry, the prosecutor, just spoken about in this case, was married to Mary Ann Trump Barry, the sister of President Trump. Talk about quirks of history. Well, I hope we've accomplished what I set out to accomplish, which was to demonstrate why the Camden 28 was such an important case, not only in the history of this court, but in this country. I want to thank all of you for coming. I hope the younger members of the audience have learned some more history. And I'll turn it back over to Jack President.
Judge Kugler, Judge Rodriguez, panelists, thank you very much for participating, and thank you even more for the sacrifice you made to save lives. Now,